guys, welcome back to another episode of Ancient Tracks, The Beast and Quarry. We're here with Mike and Ranger. They've been out in the field for, I don't know, how long have y'all been working together?
A year now, right?
Ranger and I have been working together as a research team for about a year, along with Eden and Mark.
Yeah. So y'all have had some pretty interesting things happen. You want to share some of those with us today?
Sure. So the location that we have, which we call Area C, has been extremely active for the last year. So inside of Area C, we have one location we call the Trackway, which has produced several dozen prints over the last year, or actually over the last 6 months or so. And so far, we've identified 5 different animals, 5 different potential Sasquatch footprints, animals inside of that collected group of footprints, which is actually, pretty impressive. So we have everything from one animal that's got a 14.5 inch, 6 inch footprint, all the way down to, and that animal we call a crooked foot, mostly because it has some offset toes, which is pretty interesting. And the second one is a Littlefoot, which is a smaller animal, which has about a 4 to 4.5 foot footprint, found in multiple locations, which are 2 14s, one which we call Mother, primarily because every time we see that 4.5 inch footprint, we see that other 14-ish footprint everywhere we see that, which is pretty cool. Everywhere we see Littlefoot, we see Mother. And then this weekend, we found one of the 8-inch footprints that we rarely find, but we found another one of those this time near the campsite, if you will. So the campsite is about a mile away from what we call the Trackway, which is on a creek, and so that means that these animals at least travel a mile, so which is pretty interesting.
Yeah. So y'all were out in the field this weekend. Do you have any experiences you want to share with us over the past weekend?
Yeah, sure. So this last weekend, the first night, which was Friday, the weather pretty much got on us, primarily wind and rain. So that pretty much destroyed our audio, unfortunately. So there was a couple of things that were pretty interesting that occurred. This weekend, again, like I was telling you before, was pretty much the tale of 2 vocals or 2 knocks, which is very interesting in that this weekend, every time we heard a knock, we heard 2 knocks that were separated by 5 to 6 seconds each time. That's kind of interesting for this site because we've never really seen that before, or never recorded it, or never had it happen to us. So when we did the return knock, what it does is it drives our response, for lack of a better term. So when we have these things, what's unique about this site is that everything's repeated. Everything from the rock throwing to the knocks to the footprints to the vocals, everything's repeatable, which is awesome because that gives us an opportunity to go back and try different types of things.
What has been some of your most exciting experiences?
Oh, well, I'll let Ranger answer a couple of those.
Well, we've had multiple rock throws every time. Rocks hitting the truck, the tent, and what was it? The time before this time, right? Or no, the time before last. I actually had a sighting there. It was Sunday morning. We were going to leave. We were just looking for some tracks around the camp before we left, and I stepped off in the woods, maybe 50, 75 yards, and I was looking across this kind of swamp thing, and I seen probably maybe from about stomach down, hip, legs, and everything. The jet black Bigfoot that walked. Let me say it walked to the right from where I was at, and I think for probably 5 seconds, maybe. Called Mike over. We went over, felt one footprint, and but yeah, there's a lot of stuff that happens there.
What about when y'all were the time I came and your grandmother was there, and that's when you and Mike first started walking back behind the campground? Y'all had talks and vocalizations too, didn't you? Then?
Oh yeah, I have all those recorded. We had we had multiple knocks. We had some throwing rocks kind of in the creek there, and we had some very weird vocals. So we have audio. We had one kind of grunt. We were walking, and like one kind of grunt. One was very close. It grunted at us, and a more deeper howl, like a roar or something. And then before all that happened, we were in there, and we were coming up on this little finger, and it was actually a smaller one. He kind of just ducked down, and I seen his head and shoulders go down very quick.
We heard when y'all, me and Jane heard a whoop, and it wasn't too far from us. It was, it was back in the wood line, but it wasn't coming from y'all. Y'all were in a different location. So yeah, there's stuff going on over there just about every time we go. And then Mike too, when it was me and Mark and you and Laura camping, and you had the two, right? You caught in the thermal?
So the very first, which is actually the first sighting I've ever had, my wife Laura, the first time she had ever used a thermal was that weekend, and she saw something on a pump or something, one of the, the thermal was just, it was a hot spot on the stump. So Laura wanted to go investigate it further. She walked over, started looking at the stump, and then she looked out into the forest, and she saw a hot spot. Actually, she saw two hot spots. And she called me over. Actually, I just walked over because she was looking for something. And so as we started looking at these two hot spots, I had a flashlight. And so I started looking out into the forest, and I saw these gigantic eyes, which was really weird. They looked like headlights in a car. They were huge. And I was completely freaked out by this. So anyway, we sat there for several minutes and looked at this. And so if you can imagine looking at two headlights, one would disappear, and then but one was always there, and then it would reappear and then disappear. One would disappear, so on and so forth. And there was another one to the side of that particular that sighting of those eyes, another set of eye shine. And it stayed there for 10 minutes while we were looking at this thing, which was so incredibly strange. So I went back to the campsite, and I got Mark, because Eden, I think, was inside the trailer doing whatever. And Mark came over, and we started looking at this thing, and they never moved, which was completely strange. Deer typically will run off and all those types of, they wouldn't hang around, but these did. So after about 10, 15 minutes of this, I did this really aggressive vocal, this grunt, if you will, that type of thing. And the one I was looking at, it slid over to the side, and the eye color changed from this whitish yellowish to a red color. And it stood up. And when it stood up, I was holding a flashlight like this. And when it stood up, obviously, as my flashlight went up, it went up several degrees. It was a huge difference between where it was to after it stood up. And when it stood up, I was like, hey, I said some curse words. I was like, oh my God, it stood up. And my wife, who was actually on a thermal imager, when it stood up, it stepped away from the tree. And Laura actually saw it. And she was like, oh my God, it's huge. And I was like, oh my God, it's huge. At the same exact time. The other animal, which was to its left, my right, it did the same thing. It stood up, and I could see both of those animals, or Laura could. And then I also had a thermal imager, and I looked at the thermal imager, and I could see these two gigantic. I don't know what to say. I mean, it looked like. I mean, unless there's elephants or giraffes in the southern United States. I mean, they were huge, and they were bipedal, and they walked off into the forest. And it was pretty incredible. That was the first time I've ever seen anything that I knew there's no way to explain it other than the next morning when we went out and checked that site. Aiden actually was with us. We found the tree where that animal was hiding behind, and it was, I don't know, it was probably diameter. It was a really big old growth oak tree, and there was a huge spot on the back of the tree where all of the first layer of bark and moss was scraped off, and it matched exactly where those animals were. And Mark had found an impression in the ground, and that was the first. In fact, that was the first time that I'd ever seen anything. So, first anything that I thought might be a Bigfoot. So that for me was kind of the first time that I'd ever seen anything like that. So, that was pretty interesting. And then shortly thereafter, we had several other instances that occurred. The next morning, at the end of that particular weekend, Ranger and I, we had set out some string traps near a faux campsite that we had set up with one of Eden's tents. And that morning, when we were leaving, Ranger and I went over to check those string traps. And while walking up to the site, we heard a whoop, which is pretty strange for that site, primarily because there's not I think that's the only time, Ranger, if I'm mistaken, please tell me. I think that's the only time we've ever heard a short range whoop that actually, a whoop instead of a two-dimensional whoop, like a long range vocal. That was the only time we've ever heard a short range whoop. And that was pretty neat.
I have a video and some pictures that you sent me. You want to go through those now?
Yes, ma'am. Please. Let's go ahead and do that.
Okay, I'm going to start with the video first.
Okay.
All right, folks. So here we are in an undisclosed location on our trackway. And as you can see, we've got a left foot. There's a right foot in the dirt. And here is a left foot again, a right foot. And he walked across the logs up into the terrain.
Tell me about that one.
That's one of my favorite ones ever that I've ever found as far as Class B evidence. I just think that I remember distinctly telling Ranger that we were going to have to do a lot of explanation over that particular find and talk a lot about that if that one ever got into the wild. And I still do. I think if we ever release that into the wild, we'd have a lot of interest in that particular find.
Yeah.
So
that video is awesome every time I watch it.
Yes, that is one of the most incredible things ever. Of everything I've ever found, that one is probably one of the neatest, primarily because it shows interaction with the terrain in ways that I've never seen. As far as a Bigfoot interacting with terrain. So instead of having just a specific, a footprint in soil, etc., this is a highly mobile creature that there's very few evidence ever found of. And in this particular case, it's very difficult to describe, but when you see that last step, which is on the soil, and then the next step, which is on the log, right? When you guys see that, that's about 4 feet, which is separated from that last foot on the terrain and the next to the log. Multiple times. I don't know how a human could do it. And that particular one is so interesting because it left the soil imprints on the log. So we know for a fact that this animal walked across that log and went up that hill and went up into the terrain. I have no explanation other than, and a lot of this is contextual, as most of us know. This particular site is 2.5 miles away from anything. So unless someone brought the entire family out, took all their footwear off, and freezing weather into this water, which is absolutely freezing. Trust me,
The water is freezing.
boots. It's freezing water. I don't know
You
how
go over your
anybody-
boots. Horrible.
It's hard to get back there too. It's not like a walk in the park to get to the beach. It's tough going to
That's
get back
absolutely
there.
correct. That's absolutely correct. And in this particular case, this animal that it did this, it's kind of a funny story how it happened. We went out and we found these boot prints of a hunter or someone. And so as we started following these footprints back of this hunter, we started finding footprints, right? Which are obviously Bigfoots. Full metatarsal break, whole 9 yards. Well, about, I don't know, halfway through this event, we started discovering these footprints of these animals, the Bigfoots, were actually on top of the boot print of the hunter. So the Bigfoot came behind the hunter and stepped on his boot prints, which totally freaked us out because that was crazy. And then the next morning, so that night we started casting some footprints of these animals. And the next morning, when we went out to pull the cast out of the ground, we had went out. It was about 9 o'clock at night, pitch black. So that's where we were doing the casting. It was at night, and we finished up doing the casting. And my wife was like, "Hey, it's too cold, and we can't stay out here. We'll go back to the campsite." And the next morning, Ranger and I went back to the trackway again to pull the cast out of the ground. And when we did, we found other footprints from Bigfoots had stepped on our boot prints. So that, and in fact, some of the photographs that I sent you were of those animals' footprints on top of my boot prints. So we have temporal evidence, which indicates that they stepped on my boot prints in a 9.5 hour period.
How far behind? I'm sorry, how far behind they came from? Like how long was your boot print there before they came? I mean, were they watching you the whole time? Was it a couple of hours? Was it a few minutes?
Absolutely. So the time frame from when we left that site where we had deposited where we had our boot impressions to the camp to back was less than 10 hours. So in that 10-hour period, they had come back and they had stepped on my boot prints and Ranger's boot prints. So we have photographic evidence of this. So for the first time for us anyway, we have temporal evidence that indicates that those animals were there in a 10-hour period on this creek. And it was freezing weather. It was 30 degrees outside that day. So we know exactly when they stepped on our prints. which was in that 10-hour period. So that was the first time, in 20 years I've ever got anything like that. So I know for a fact where they were, and I know for a fact that they did it within this 10-hour period.
Yeah.
There's no doubts about it. They stepped over my print, which is absolutely incredible.
How far apart were the footprints on the log?
2.5 feet. An animal that was extremely well balanced. Everything in that particular incident, where we're talking about the log crossing, you're talking about an animal with a lot of balance, a lot of power. When he got onto the log, there was a huge distance in between the footprint on the ground, the footprint on the log, right? And then as the animal went across, it was in a straight. If you can imagine what a balance beam would look like, they were in straight lines. And then when the animal exited, well, we don't know exactly which way the animal went, but we got a pretty good idea. There's a small goat trail that goes off of that log up into the terrain. Now, one of the things that we've noticed that's in particular for this site, and I'm not sure it's indicative of every site, is they go in places that you don't think they're going to go. So, for example, there would be a tree, places in between trees like this big, right? They will go right between there. Places where they grab trees and different types of things where the bark is just, where the bark is disrupted. There's mud on the trees and such. It's absolutely incredible. There's 100% evidence that somebody or something went in between these trees, and it's absolutely incredible. This site is fantastic for that. You can go from point A to point B into a trackway, and there's evidence the entire way of where this animal went. It's one of the most unique sites ever for this type of thing.
Yeah, it's incredible. I'm jealous.
Well, I mean, we ain't even really got to the neat parts yet.
Okay, so let's get to the pictures.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, here we go. Y'all ready?
Okay. So this particular animal is pretty unique. As you guys can see, that's a Copenhagen, and a Copenhagen is 3 inches in diameter. So that's approximately from the end of the toe to the end of the heel. That's approximately 14 inches, give or take a little bit. And this particular animal, this one's unique in that if you can see the big toe, look just behind the big toe. Yeah. If you look just behind the big toe, there's a gigantic mass behind the animal's big toe, which that's the only one that demonstrates that, which we've only found that right foot with that particular pathology. I'm not really sure why that is. That's the only footprint I've ever seen in any photograph ever of a Bigfoot ever with that particular pathology. Now, one of the things that's unique about this is if you look at the way the animal steps on its outside of its foot. So in this case, it steps on that's a right footprint. So it steps on the right outside portion of its foot first. And then if you look at the toes, the way the toes are stacked up, that's the way it steps. So there's a little toe overlapped by the next toe, the next toe, the next toe, and then there's a big toe. Now, one of the things that's interesting about these footprints that's kind of cool is in addition to the mid-partial break, which is evident in this, as you guys can see to the upper left of the can, they have toenails. So you can actually see the toenail prints inside of the footprint. So instead of just being toes, they're toenails, which is the most amazing thing ever that you can see inside these footprints. And it's obvious. It's there. And I think that in this particular animal's case, that mass that's behind this large toe is perhaps an injury that mass causes the animal to walk on the outside of his foot. So that particular one, that's why it walks the way that's the way it walks the way it does. Instead of being flat-footed, it walks on the outside of his foot because of that potential injury behind his toe, and that's just a guess. In this particular case, this footprint demonstrates that every single time. So this one to me is one of the most amazing ones ever. I just think that when you look at this, it's absolutely indicative of a Bigfoot. There's no other way to explain this. This is not a human foot at all. We know that from looking at it. So this is one of the most amazing finds we've ever made.
Yeah. So it looks pretty deep too.
Yes, and they are. So one of the things that we do every single time, pretty much, when we find an exceptional footprint, Ranger and I attempt to make another footprint near that footprint, if that makes sense to you.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't ever recreate it as far as depth or size or anything. We can't do it. I mean, even jumping, sometimes you can't recreate those prints.
It's a big guy.
Yeah.
Okay. You ready to move to the next one?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
This one is probably the most unique, amazing thing about this site. 2 weeks prior to this, Ranger had went on the sandbars at the trackway and found a very small footprint next to a 14-inch print. So we kind of adopted this naming convention of that 14-inch print being mother and this small 4.5-inch print being Littlefoot. So that's what we call it. We call this one Littlefoot.
Yeah.
This particular footprint was taken about a mile away from the trackway on a boat launch about 75 yards away from the campsite. And if you zoom into this particular footprint, you can see where the animal had actually took his toes and dug into that mud to grip. Now, one of the things that's unique about this is when you look at the large toe, the big toe on this footprint, remember how the other animal had that large space behind his big toe? Littlefoot demonstrates that exact same thing. So I'm not 100% sure why that is, but it's one of the most unique things I've ever seen in foot morphology of a Bigfoot. They demonstrate exactly the same thing, which is incredible. And we found this particular footprint of Littlefoot in 5 different locations within approximately 1.5 miles.
With that same behind the big toe?
Yes, and I'm sorry. Actually, we found this particular footprint after this weekend. We found it in 7 different locations. We found it in 2 more different locations this weekend. We found this footprint again near a location by the boat ramp and near where we think they go into that campsite where they step over that gate. We actually found this footprint again.
Oh, wow. Wow. It's a cute little footprint.
Oh, it's gorgeous. And the thing is, if you zoom into the print, you can see different types of you can see different types of folds, etc. Behind the toes, on the foot paddocks, which is absolutely amazing. You can see this on several different prints of this animal, which is absolutely incredible. And in addition to that, most of the footprints that we have, you can see those different types of folds and things, different types of structure on the foot itself. Everything from the mid-tarsal break forward, you can see different types of foot structure, which is amazing because mostly the print media that we've been luckily enough for these animals to step in, sand, mud, etc. We've been pretty lucky with that. We've had a lot of good luck with being able to get those.
Yeah. Okay. Next one.
Okay. So this one, I'll let Ranger describe this one as he nearly stepped on this one. So I'll let Ranger describe this one.
Well, we came up to where we normally were looking at, and I walked across the creek first, and to another sandbar. I was walking, and probably 6 inches I stepped, and I looked down, and I stepped on this footprint. I called Mike over, and we're both looking at it, amazed. But yeah, we call this one Crooked Foot because he has a crooked foot, I guess. And
Yeah.
but yeah, obviously you can tell. And Mike thinks maybe there's something. Mike broke something years ago, and it's.
Yeah.
I don't know, Mike. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think when we look at the pathology of footprints across the board for these types of animals, we see everything from, for example, the Blue Mountain cast of Cripplefoot, the Bossberg cast, which had an animal which looked like it had a crush injury, that type of thing. I believe that's what we're actually seeing here. And in this particular animal, if you look at the footprint, you can clearly see the offset toes. Now, the thing that's interesting about this particular footprint is if you look at the big toe, there's a considerable space between the big toe and the other 4 digits of the foot. There's an actual space there. And if you zoom into the print itself, you can see pads, you can see toe pads, you can see different types of morphology into the foot, which is absolutely amazing. This was a huge animal. And when I say huge, I would say 400 pounds. Easily. Primarily because luckily for us, it stepped in the only place it could take that footprint, which was amazing. Up and to the right of this particular footprint, it stepped again, and it left a heel impression. But because of where it was, in this particular case, when the animal stepped down, it penetrated that first layer of rock, and it made those impressions into the sand. So we got extremely lucky with this. And this particular print is 14.5 inches from the end of the toe to the end of the heel. It does have a mid-tarsal break, so it may actually be larger than that. It actually has a mid-tarsal flex. So some of these footprints, when we measure them, we measure them straight line. So we're not 100% sure exactly how much that mid-tarsal break or that flex takes out of that print. But in this particular animal, it's 14.5 inches and 6 inches across at its widest point.
Did y'all measure how long the step was?
This particular animal's stride was only about 1.5 feet. In this particular case, you find a couple of footprints on one sandbar, and then there is a whole bunch of water, right? And then on the next sandbar, there'll be another print. So in this particular case, for this animal, this is the first time we've ever seen this one. This is animal number 5. We've never seen this one before. In this particular case, we found another print, which wasn't great, but you can tell based off of the shape of the footprint how it's crooked on the toes. We found this one in another sandbar. So on that same exact weekend expedition. So this animal, we actually have 2 footprints of this exact animal. and they're approximately 75 yards apart. But I don't know. I can't say for sure what they're doing. But, my best guess is they use that because it's an easy way to travel. They travel through the water, and then they go from point A to point B, for example. Whatever they're doing. But to say what they're doing there, I have no idea. Other than I think that perhaps they're getting water. There's plenty of evidence from all of the other tracks that these animals are coming to that location. Either getting water or just traveling. The first instance that we came across this trackway, for example, we have footprints of these of animals going from point A to point B that are over half a mile long. I'm talking about, you guys need to really understand that this trackway is literally a half a mile long with 5 separate animals.
Wow.
So that's, for us, that's absolutely incredible. So, we get different types of footprints. We get living footprints. So the foot aren't exactly the same depending on where they are. They grab the sand. We have footprints of animals that have splayed toes that are the size of my hand. So there's a couple of different indicators of, going up terrain, walking through sand, walking across that log. So what they're doing there, I don't really know. But with 5 separate different types of footprints, at least 5, we believe we have a family group there. So this particular print, this one's amazing to us because if you actually zoom into the print, you can actually see toenails. So this particular animal is one of the 14-inch prints. We're not sure if this is mother or not, but this particular set of prints, these are the mid-range prints that are 13 to 14 inches, give or take a little bit. And the 8-inch prints also demonstrate this too. The reason why this one's really cool to us is because if you look at the print, it's actually a heel, mid-tarsal break. Several different things that are demonstrated behind the metatarsals, behind the toes, and then the toenails, which for us is absolutely amazing. You can actually see how the toenails are worn down not into an exact point, but you can clearly see, and there's a small step between the end of the toe pad and the footprints, which is why we showed this one, because it's absolutely incredible. And it indicates that they have toenails, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's a good print.
Yes, ma'am. And actually, we casted one very similar to this one. Actually, I think this may be the one that we casted. I'm not 100% sure. Is that the one we casted? Yeah, there it is.
Awesome.
Wow. Just the definition from the pinky toe down to the mid-tarsal on the side, that is crazy.
You can see it here.
Yeah.
Very clear.
Yeah, the depth of it. That's a good print.
This is the left foot here. Wait, no, I'm sorry. This is the right foot. But the depth of the mid-tarsal is very...
That's awesome. That's a good print.
Yeah, and unfortunately, in this particular, when we did these casts, actually, this location for these prints, although great for print media, is terrible for casting, primarily because the soil is extremely wet. And it's sandy. So when we try to make casts, the material doesn't really do the cast very well, if you will. It's a challenge to try to pull these casts out that are great. So most of these, the photographs and the 3D scans and such, they pretty much do they pretty much tell the story. Casting is very difficult here. But one of the things that's interesting is I've never been to a location with this many different types of prints and this many different types of, 5 different sets of prints that we have right now. And it's absolutely incredible. And in addition to the sightings, we know the animals are there. We know for a fact because we've actually seen them with our own eyes. In addition to the prints, the next thing that we're looking for, of course, is to try to get video of these things and to try to find locations where, for lack of a better term, where they live, right? But as you can see, this is a 1 in a million find for this location.
That's awesome.
So again, here this is a print showing toes and different types of things over different types of terrain. So in this particular instance, you can see where the animal pushed its heel into the rocks and then demonstrated its toes to the sand. One of the things that's unique about this trackway is because of the different types of terrain that are there. We can see how the foot interacts with, different types of terrain, as in this case. So it demonstrates weight, it demonstrates flexibility, it demonstrates toes, demonstrates its mid-tarsal break across every different type of terrain. What does that mean? For us, it means that we have a living, breathing foot. Instead of just saying, hey, these could be potentially stompers or human beings, there's no way. These footprints do not demonstrate any such. And this is the cast that Ranger and I took. This is the pull out of the ground. So as you can see, that's why we call it crooked foot. This particular animal has some offset toes. Not really sure why it demonstrates this. Now, the thing that when you look at this footprint, the thing that, or in this particular image, that needs to be understood is that this is actually a left foot. So this isn't a right foot. So that turn is actually opposite of what you think it would be. So the turn is actually towards the pinky toe.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
So this is crooked foot.
This is crooked foot. So in this particular cast, after we cleaned it up to give you a basic understanding of the look of the foot, again, the cast was unfortunately rocks, and it wasn't a very good cast. But it gives you the idea of what that foot looks like.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that we discovered this weekend is the waterway, the major waterway, whether it's this particular creek, which is a tributary to another large creek, or the actual large creek. This weekend we discovered that pretty much everywhere these animals exit those locations are where ground streams exit the ground. Now, I don't know if that's happens to be a, just a weird coincidence or something, but the location where this was taken and numerous other ones where underground streams exited the ground and went in, not actually tributaries, not streams themselves, but where underground streams exited the ground and went in to these larger bodies of water. So, for example, the location we found this weekend, where the animals were going up near the boat ramp that's near the campsite, there was an underground tributary that exited the ground. And in this particular case, the same thing is true. There's an underground tributary that exits there as well. Now, why they do that, I don't know. And I don't know if it just happens to be a coincidence, but every single place, for the most part, we've ever found where these animals exit this waterway and go up into the terrain is where a tributary, an underground stream, comes into that tributary. And again, I don't know if that happens to be, just happens to be just the way it is, or be something that's, unique, or I'm not sure. But we discovered that over the last, month or so, that wherever they exit the waterway and go up into the terrain, that seems to be a common theme.
I think this is the one you were talking about earlier.
That's correct. So this particular footprint, if you see the little wavy lines, that's my boot, and the footprint is literally over the top of my boot. This is the one that drove us insane. This was the first one that absolutely drove us bonkers. Because when we went down to pull the casts, one of the casts that we pulled is approximately 2 feet below where this photograph was taken. So over the night of us allowing the cast to dry, the animal stepped on my boot print.
Mm.
So in fact, that's what drove us to continue up the creek to find where he had actually went up the log. Had this not occurred, in fact, my wife was very angry at me, and I think my wife was very angry at me because we wound up going another 3 hours down the creek. She was not very happy about that, but because she was ready to go home. But after we found this was the driving force to make us continue to go up the creek. And I think it's important to note that in this particular case, the animal stepped on my boot print, but it also stepped on the boot print of the hunter, of the hunter's boots that we had originally saw. So does that mean that they come behind people and say, "Hey, there's something going on," and then back trail folks? We're not really sure. But in this particular case, I can tell you for a fact that footprint. In other words, I can nail down within 10 hours where that footprint was made.
Yeah.
Which I've never been able to do ever. That to me is absolutely super duper important.
That's awesome. Let's see.
Okay, so
Same
these, yes, ma'am, same thing. These are different prints. Basically, over our prints, different types of prints over any given, over that 10-hour period. I think it's important to note also that when we talk about these animals, or we talk about these prints over these different, locations and things, probably within, and Ranger, you can correct me, probably within 10 square feet on this one trackway that we discovered, I found more footprints than probably anyone's ever found in the history of Bigfoot. In one 10 square foot area. There are numerous footprints, 4 different sizes before we found Bigfoot. Actually 3, not counting Littlefoot. And they're everywhere. And the only way you can explain this is there's a family group. There's numerous animals here, and it's the strangest thing ever. So I don't know how else to explain it.
So I wanted to ask you. I wanted to clarify something that you said earlier about Bigfoot. Eden asked you the distance between the footprints, and you said it was how far apart?
Maybe 2 feet.
2 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you might have a limb?
No, I would think that contextually you need to understand where the footprint was. So contextually, I think that the animal stepped and was going to step into the water or taking a drink or any number of things. So it's very difficult for me to say why he only took that one small step. I don't know. The other footprints are anywhere from, we have some that are 2.5, 3 feet, 4 feet. So I don't think that there's any way for us to determine exactly why he took that smaller step. And the smaller step was right on the edge of the water. So I can't say why that particular stride was that short.
Those are some great pictures. I love those pictures. So,
Ranger?
tell me about this weekend.
Well, one thing we forgot, last time we were there, I found knuckle prints.
Oh, yes, that's correct. Sorry. We find so many things that sometimes it's hard for us to remember all the things we find. So, Ranger, tell the story. Well, I'll tell my portion and then Ranger will tell his. So, the second to last time we were there, because we go there about every 2 weeks, myself and my wife were there earlier before everyone else was, and someone had parked their truck near the campsite to go canoeing. So this particular location, a lot of times people will just drop their trucks off, and the canoe master will go up to a different location, drop them off, and they'll canoe down, and they'll pick their vehicles up, and they go home. In this particular case, these folks had this really nice black Chevy Silverado. It was absolutely gorgeous, I will admit, and it was well kept. It was clean. There wasn't a fingerprint on this vehicle. So about 2 hours later, after the canoe guy came and talked to us, I was talking to my wife, and I heard someone walking near the truck. And I asked my wife, "Hey, what are those folks doing up there? Are they going to stay or what? Because we don't like it when a lot of people hang around." And my wife said, "Well, they got the van, the master." And then I said, "Wait a minute, I don't know how that's possible because I just heard the people walking around their truck." And she said, "Well, no, they're not there. There's no one there." And I said, "Well, all right, cool. Well, I guess I just heard something." So about 2 hours later, Ranger and his family show up, and go ahead from there, Ranger.
We show up and we start setting up camp. I look over towards the truck because I thought I had heard something. I look over, and it looks like I see a head duck down very fast. The bed of the truck there. It looked like I see a head. So I asked Mike. I said, "Is there anybody?" And he freaks out. And he's like, "Laura," he gets his wife, and so yeah, we go over there, and we're looking around, and we actually find knuckle prints where the knuckle prints were, you can see right over the top of a log and see straight into camp. And we cast the knuckle print here. You can see it was like this. He put his knuckles down like that.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's awesome.
There's one here, you can barely see it. You can see knuckles. And he was saying this truck was clean as could be, and it's literally the cleanest truck I've ever seen in my life. And there's actually fingerprints on the truck. And so I think Laura, my wife, went up to the truck, did the same thing, and hers went away because she don't have dirty hands. Well, whatever put the fingerprints on this truck has greasy or oily hands, so they stayed. There's fingerprints on the truck where he was looking over. I guess where I see the head. So.
Yeah, and that was one of those cases where it's kind of strange where you have multiple little pieces of data that come together, and you're like, okay, well, I'm not really sure, but a whole bunch of little data points come together into a whole bunch of maybes turn into a problem. And in that particular case, he actually saw it. And then that night, that was probably the worst rock throw that we've ever had, was that particular night. So that's the next thing I would like to talk about, which is the camp interactions. So in the camp interactions, one of the things we've, in this particular case, in this site, Eden has actually experienced it as well. She was there. They throw rocks like a professional baseball player. I have no idea. You know, this is typical behavior of Bigfoots in other locations. But for us, it's so strange because to me, it's one of the most unnerving things that I've ever experienced in Bigfoot. It drives me insane. So, like, for example, you're just sitting there and boom, here comes a rock. And unless, you know, it's a space rock, I can't explain. I can't explain how it happens. It's one of the weirdest things ever. And in this particular camp location,
Those
they do it regularly.
coming from the woods behind us, like my tent was up against the woods, and then just a short distance through the woods was a creek, and those rocks were coming from that direction, landing in the back of Mike's vehicle. But it also hit my tent, and it hit that backside, and then the porta potty wasn't far from my tent, and it hit the backside of the porta potty. So they were coming from the direction of the creek.
That's correct. We over the last 5 or 6 times, they've become pretty patternized. We think they're coming across from, there's a parking lot in front of the campsite. So we're trying to figure out a way to capture that on video. And unfortunately, it's not sufficient for what we need. And like everything else and every other researchers, you know, we're just citizen scientists trying to do our thing. And the vast majority of the time, the things we need, we simply don't, you know, they're expensive. We don't have. So we're trying to come up with ways to do it based off the things that we do have. One of the things that we can say, though, is that this location is extremely patternized. So we know, for example, they throw rocks. They throw rocks often. I say rocks, pebbles. They throw pebbles often. So it's something repeatable. So our next phase of research is to try to figure out how to capture them doing that. And they're extremely stealthy. They're very smart, and they're very, very sneaky is the best word I can explain it. We've had them sneak up within 15 feet of us and hit us with rocks. And when we start looking around, we had one, was it 4 weeks ago? The animal was behind our tent. He threw a rock, hit the truck, grunted, screamed, and hollered, and ran into the woods. And I actually saw him running into the woods. So they, everything you think they don't do, or that they won't get close to that's just not true. So our next methodology we're trying to figure out is how to capture that.
So tell me, how clear have you seen one before?
So I have seen one, Ranger and I have seen one together. And that sighting was waist to head with an animal that I'm fairly certain that didn't really know we were there. We were walking down this creek bed, and we were trying to be kind of sneaky, and we went into this heavily, it's kind of like this little brush area, and she, whomever, stood up, and Ranger was in front of me. Ranger got a head-on look at it. She looked straight at it, and I got a pretty good glimpse of that particular animal, and it ducked down and went into this draw and ran off.
Mm.
And then I've seen one on the thermal imager. I've seen two on the thermal imager that are absolutely positive that they were animals. And then I've seen one when we left the campsite, that the specific campsite that we're talking about, we were going to go get ice one morning, and my wife and I were in the truck, and I turned around the road, and what I did, one was on the edge of the road and took off and ran into the woods, and I actually recorded that one on a camera. And I can tell you one thing that's true pretty much across the entire spectrum of these animals is how fast they are. They are incredibly fast. They are, they do not, they're incredibly fast. How it's incredible that an animal that size can move that fast. And the image in the camera was exactly what I saw, which was a large black animal running through the woods. You can see the fur, shiny fur, kind of greasy looking, and yeah, it's absolutely incredible. Ranger's had several sightings, and I'll let him explain those, or actually a couple of good ones, in addition to mine that was far better. In fact, when he was 10, he had a fantastic sighting, and I'll let him explain that one.
Yeah, when I was 10 years old, me and my dad were going to go squirrel hunting. And so I went down. I didn't live with my parents at the time, so I went down to his house there to get him, and he wasn't there. I think he had went to work or something. So I had a little 410, so I went by myself. So I walked down this little road on our land there to a food plot and walked to the end of it. Kind of butts up to another road that goes down to the right. And I was just standing there probably 15 minutes, I would say. I heard something coming, and Bigfoot just walked straight across that path there, and it walked across, and it looked at me just one time, and it never broke stride, and it kept going probably 40 yards in the woods, and it stopped, which I was froze. I was terrified, and I was so scared. I was kind of falling down because my knees were so weak, and so I began to walk out. And my knees are just so weak because I'm shaking so bad, and for probably months after that, I was just terrified, and anyway, years after that, I was seeing research online that people were doing, and I'm like, I got to get into that, learn more about these things. So I got into it. I met Eden and Mark, and then I met Mike, and then I think the second sighting was when he's talking about, where we were on the creek and we seen the one kind of go down. And then the third was about a month ago, right, Mike? There.
Yeah, about a month and a half ago.
Yeah, when I seen it kind of, it's probably from here down, smut black, and I seen it for probably 5 seconds there. But yeah, so it's three definite sightings I've had. But yeah, that's how I got into all this.
Yeah, it's funny how Ranger and I met was they were actually camping where we wanted to camp, which is where we usually camp. But anyway, Mark, he's going to go talk to anybody. If there's someone around, he's going to talk to them, and he will always talk about Bigfoot. So he went over there, and Ranger, did he tell y'all we were Bigfoot hunting, and then you said we are too? Is that how it went?
He said he was asking when we were gonna leave, and I said, well, probably tomorrow. And he said, well, I was gonna tell you, there was a Bigfoot sighting in this area here. And I said, really? I said, we're Bigfoot researchers. That's what I do. He said, oh, we are too. And so that from then on is kind of history, I guess.
Yep. And that was what? How long ago? Were you what? 14, 15?
I was about 14, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm 18 now. So.
Cool. 4 years ago. Yeah. But yeah, that was a good chance meeting there, because we've really
Yeah.
enjoyed having you being a part of the team. And I know Mike loves having you to go out in the
Yeah.
woods with him.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, Ranger's the guy. But one of the things that's another thing that's interesting that I think researchers in general, and we've discussed this several times across the team. A lot of sites, and particularly, like, for example, the site we're talking about, Area C, is one of those things where if you look at the locality, if you look at the folks that live there, the ideology of Bigfoot's living there are long. There's not just there's an entire Bigfoot lore to a specific location. And I think it's important for, like, for example, if researchers are out there looking around for places to go, and I found this to be true in multiple locations, there's certain signs, right? So, for example, in Area C, you have folks that, fence in their gardens to keep the Bigfoots out, right? There's signs, Bigfoot crossing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's Bigfoot signs in everyone's yard. Even and Ranger can, vouch for this. The United States Forest Rangers who literally tell you, hey, this is a great place to find Bigfoots, right?
Yeah. I was gonna say this. I was down camping before I met Mark and Eden, and a forest ranger pulled down there. I've told Mike this. I don't know if Eden knows this. And a forest ranger pulled down there, and he said, how are you doing or whatever? And I said, we're doing fine. And I was probably 13 at the time, and I asked the forest ranger, I said, well, we're looking for Bigfoot. We're doing Bigfoot research. He said, well, you're in the right spot to do that. And he got back in his truck and drove off. And I'm sitting there like, did he really just say that? Because then I didn't know many people that did that or believed in him, I guess, and it just surprised me so much, him being a forest ranger, and to say that.
Yep, and the original story how Ranger found the location from another person, so every person that tells you anything about, and this is a Mike Grayism, but any person that tells you anything about a particular location or a sighting or anything else that they didn't have, I think you're looking at two generations of stories. Someone told someone who told someone who told you. And that's actually very important. And for example, one of the locations that I researched here in central Louisiana, I was trying to go down to this particular forest road, and I couldn't get there. So I was looking around, and the map showed a different road. And I went up to this guy's property, and I drive up there, and he's got these, 2, 3, 4 dogs. One of them's got like 3 legs. He's like this regular, farmer guy out in the middle of nowhere in central Louisiana, if you're familiar with that type of person. And, he's like 85 years old, and he's got like, John Deere tractors from like 1919, just like a salt of the earth person, right? That doesn't give a damn about me or anybody else. So I drive up there in my Jeep, and I'm asking, hey, how do you get over here to such and such road? Well, I guess we're like a specific breed of people that, when you have Bigfoots in your location, they know what we look like. And this particular guy was like, hey, are you out here looking for the Bigfoots? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, look, man, don't bother the Bigfoots. They got nothing for you. Just, don't bother them. And I think that's indicative of a lot of things, that as researchers that we kind of ignore, which is the people in the research areas. Talk to those folks. Go to those local little stores and say, hey, it's like Ranger said, the vast majority of the time as researchers, we don't want to do that because we're afraid that people are going to make jokes about us or whatever. Don't be. Ask questions. When you go to, the local store, and the local store has Bigfoot stickers all over the place, is a perfect example. They didn't get those Bigfoot stickers for nothing, right? I mean, there's a million other different types of things that a store can get, yet they have hundreds of Bigfoot types of stickers. Well, why do they get those? Well, generally speaking, they got those because people, right? The Bigfoot phenomenon is popular there. Ask questions. Ask anybody. Ask. And one of the things he said.
I wanted to add something to that real quick. Is there's a little store up the road from me. I don't know, maybe 3-4 miles, and I went in there, and they had Bigfoot on the baseball caps, and they had Bigfoot stickers, and I said, they got them in this area, and yeah, there was a sighting just through. He started recounting to me Mark's sighting. So somehow word had got out. I didn't think anybody locally knew he had a sighting maybe a half a mile up the road from that little store. But word gets around, and just across the highway, I talked to somebody that lived over there, and she said they hear vocalizations all the time. She said everybody that lives there knows about it. So, yeah, It's not a coincidence. No,
absolutely not. And I think as researchers, you can use that as a tool. And, I don't like to say this. Researching is far more popular than what it was before. And folks are far more open about the topic of Bigfoot, for example. So when you go into a location and you say, hey, I remember going to Hanobi, Oklahoma many, many, many years ago, and stopping at this little store at the trailer park there. And I walked in the door, and the lady was like, "You're here hunting Bigfoot," and she knew right off the bat, because I had to, I guess I had the appropriate look. And she's like, "Oh yeah, they're all over the place," and in many different locations. I think it's important for folks to go out there, and networking is important. I said this at that conference that we were at there in Natchitoches. Networking is important. When you plug into people, every Bigfoot sighting takes two things. It takes a Bigfoot and it takes a human. You can't have one without the other. So I think that's kind of important. And the site we're researching now, based off of Ranger's experience, for example, we're talking what, Ranger, nearly 10 years of validated knowledge that these animals are there.
Yep.
10 years of people saying, hey, go here, hey, go here, hey, go here. Go to area C, go to area C. Of course, that's not the name of it, but we don't want to tell that. But yeah, there's tons of locations like that where they're out there. Patterson-Gimlin, for example. Patterson-Gimlin weren't there for no reason, right? They were there because of Jerry Crew, and they were there because of all the other different loggers that had instances of finding Bigfoots and sightings and things. And Patterson-Gimlin wound up going to that location, and bam, that's what happened. They caught Patty on video. So I think it's important a lot of times that people are telling you where to go, right? The culture's telling you where to go. The locals are telling you this is where to go, and we just ignore it. Or we're not plugged into it. That's the best term. We're not plugged into that. I think it's important that folks understand that if you're a researcher, research. Get out there, get off the couch, and get out in the woods, and go find things. But never forget, don't forget the foundation, right? The 4 horsemen of Bigfoot, and go out there, research, but learn, and take all the things that those guys did, John Green, Grover Krantz, et cetera, and Jeff Meldrum, and learn those types of things, and look for that in the wild. Look for the things that they've already done the work. right? And that's the truth. They've already done the work. Go out there and match that work with what you see and what you find, and you'd be amazed at how much how helpful those guys' work already is. So that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I've told Ranger 1,000 different times, that I'm not the one that figured out how that footprint's Bigfoot. I didn't do that, right? Jeff Meldrum, Krantz, the rest of those guys did. I'm just looking for the things that they say that makes it a Bigfoot print.
Thank you for coming. I enjoyed hearing what happened last weekend.
Anytime, I enjoy it.